Here is your Portland market update for April 2023. We'll be diving into mortgage rates, where inventory is at, and giving you a better idea as a buyer or seller. With that, we'll dive right into it. Interest rates have held steady around the mid sixes for a majority of the month. It has definitely gone up and down a little bit from those numbers, but something to keep in mind that we will continue to see a little bit more volatility throughout this year. And hopefully by the end of the year, we'll see interest rates start to drop closer to the 5%. Now, with that, we are going to be having a meeting for the Federal Reserve coming up on May 3rd, which will likely have a 25 basis point hike. And on top of that, we'll have inflation numbers coming out soon after that on May 10th. So hopefully those numbers will become a little bit lower, but given how inflation is very sticky, it will most likely not drop as much. From February to March, we saw inflation drop by about 1%, which is fantastic. However, one of the major indicators that the Federal Reserve is looking at is core inflation. This is inflation that subtracts energy costs and food costs because they're a little bit more volatile. And we actually saw a 0.1% increase in that. So we're hoping as we start to see a trend going downwards, we'll see the Fed hopefully step off the brakes a little bit more and have a little bit more relief for the market. So as we've dived into this springtime market, we are starting to see that the inventory or months of supply has actually been going down over the last couple of months, starting in January at 2.7 months of inventory, then dropping down to 1.9, and then recently to 1.6 months of inventory. We are starting to see that a lot of houses are going very quickly. About 66.8% of listings will be off the market within 2 weeks. So that will continue to probably rise until we hit about the June timeframe, and at that point, it'll start to slowly trend down because of seasonality. One thing I do want to kind of show you the difference between inventory between 2006 to 2010, really highlighting the 2008 crash versus now. And with that, I want to shout out for Mike Nuss. He was the one who put together this graph, but it's a great show of how much inventory we would really need to have in order to meet the 2008 expectations or get to that point where it's much more of a buyer's market. As of right now, a majority of the loans within the last decade have had much tighter lending regulation to them, so you have a lot more qualified buyers or qualified people who have bought within the last decade, and with that, about 90.8% of the mortgage holders within Oregon have an interest rate that's lower than 5%. We are going to have to see a lot of damage, economically speaking, in order to see more listings kind of pop up in the future. We're still not building enough in terms of new construction, so that's also going to be another factor. And this is where Portland is a little bit different than a lot of other states in the sense that it's a lot harder to build and create the inventory that's needed, even with the restrictions laxing a little bit more in terms of the Portland RIP project. If you like the content so far, it would be wonderful if you could hit that like and subscribe button. It helps out my channel a ton, and I would greatly appreciate it. For buyers, we are starting to see a lot of situations where you're going to be competing to some degree, and with that, I've seen offers where we only have maybe competing against 2 to 3 offers, but also seen situations where we're competing against 8 to 10 other offers. And this really depends on the place you're looking at. And just know that if you are going for the prettiest home for that weekend, you'll most likely face a lot more competition versus finding something that's a little bit more of a diamond in the rough. One note I really want to emphasize for buyers right now is using the 85% rule. There's not a lot of inventory right now, and there's probably not going to be a lot of inventory moving forward. So note that you're going to want to make sure that you use the 85% rule, which is where if the house meets 85% of what your needs are, then it's a good indicator that it's probably going to be a good fit for you. There's never going to be a house that's going to be 100%. I know buyers or builders actually who have built their own homes, and later down the line, they do have things that they want to change about the home. So there's never going to be a perfect home for you. And something to keep in mind and have a little bit more of an idea with. On top of this, I'm having a lot of conversations with buyers, understanding the fact that, hey, maybe later down the line with interest rates do drop, that might be a good time to buy, but just know that you're not alone in that thinking if that is your track. Right now, there is a little bit of competition, but we're still able to negotiate some repairs if need be, and sellers are still willing to do that. Now, if we get into a situation maybe by the end of the year or into next year where interest rates have dropped a lot, we have a lot of people coming back into the market, then might be a situation where it might be a little bit harder to compete when we're starting to have maybe 8 to 10 offer situations and you're giving away a lot more concessions to the seller. So keep that in mind and just kind of think of what do you want your buying experience to be like and see whether or not that right now would be a good time. And again, buy when you can and don't overextend yourself to make sure that you are not put in a financially bad position. From the state of housing in Portland was the fact that 1 in 4 people pay more than half of their income towards rent, which is kind of crazy to think about. And on top of that, just know that you're paying someone else's mortgage. So I'm actually a little curious if you have looked at starting the home buying process, what your experience has been so far. If you could drop a comment down below, that'd be fantastic, and I will do my best to respond. Hey sellers, so with that, we are starting to see a lot of houses still kind of pop up, but we're still seeing about 25.5% less new listings than last year. So we are still in need of a lot more inventory to get to a more normal market, which is closer to that 2 to 4 months of inventory here in the Portland market. And with that, if you are getting ready for listing your house, it's going to be very imperative that you try to maximize that on the first 2 weeks of the experience. So for example, heading out of town for that first week and where you can do open houses and have a lot of people come through, this is really going to be key in order for you not to get lost in the shuffle. It's also going to be helpful to look at the neighborhood and see whether or not there's new listings popping up around you, and just know you're going to face a little bit more competition, but it will be something that you can overcome with the right strategy. One thing I do want to note on top of this, and why there's probably going to be a continued supply issue, is that in the state of Oregon, 90.8% of the mortgages are less or equal to 5%. Now, with that, if we go down to 4%, only about 55% of the mortgages are lower than that. So that's a lot of sellers who have very low interest rates. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to necessarily sell your place now, especially if you don't want to get rid of the great rates you have. So something to look at is also doing the rent buy situation where you are renting out your place, then looking at buying your place, depending on that. If you're ever curious about that, feel free to reach out and I'd be more than happy to talk to you a little bit further about that. Now, looking into the local data, we are seeing that overall, the market action index, which the higher that is to 100, the more of a seller's market it is. The lower towards the 0 mark is more of a buyer's market. And once we really pass that 30 threshold, that's where we're much more into a buyer's market. Now, overall, you can see that we are still in kind of a more neutral market overall, but still a little bit more towards the edge on the seller's side. Milwaukee is hitting its stride, and there is a lot of competition there, and houses are going a lot faster. As you can see, for the days on market is much shorter, so something to keep in mind. Overall, we're not seeing inventory rise that dramatically based off of the last month, but something where we're hoping a little bit more inventory will come on overall, but we will probably have to see a lot more economic damage happen from there. And even then, I'm not even 100% sure whether or not there will be that much more inventory that pops up. Thank you so much for watching all this. If you have any questions or anything of that nature, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll also have my contact information if you want to reach out. Thank you so much for watching.